Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Jane Georges, the Dean of the School of Nursing at the University of San Diego. At the Hahn School of Nursing and Health Science, we are very, very close to the COVID pandemic and have been since the beginning. We have with us today nurses who actually either had the virus itself and were very ill, and one who had a very dear family member who was severely ill. I think all of us as nurses can learn from other nurses about what that lived experience is like.
It was my 40th anniversary. I was married in San Antonio, Texas. And my husband and I said, well, let's go back to San Antonio and, go back to all the places that we used to go to. Of course, it's changed. Mm-hmm. And when I got home, after you fly, you kind of get that little congestion or not just feel 100% or something, and didn't think anything of it in a couple days. And then, of course, we go on lockdown and I'm home, and it started, a little bit worse. And I thought, oh, it's probably just because of the weather change or something like that, but then I started with the fevers and the cough and thought, well, maybe I picked up a little cold, but then the cough kept progressively getting worse. The fever was every day. I was taking Tylenol, I was taking cough suppressant, didn't work, and finally had to relent and go in and talk to the doctor and see the doctor. And he said, yes, you have COVID. And at that time they weren't testing us. And so it was very difficult because it's like, well, how do you know I don't just have a regular old bug that's been going around? And by the time we chalked up all my symptoms with the cough as severe as it was, the shortness of breath, and not even be able to do my own ADLs was just embarrassing. To have to go take a shower and sit in the shower because I couldn't stand there that long. I kept telling myself, well, if you're on the Tylenol and you get higher than 101, then you'll go to the hospital. So I kept giving myself parameters to not go to the hospital. And I was lucky in that I was only sick about 3 weeks. And then I gave myself 2 more weeks at home of not wanting to come in contact with anybody, just in case I was still shedding the virus. Mm-hmm. That was my cycle, and it was the worst. I couldn't sleep. I mean, it was just constant. Even with a prescription cough suppressant, it still did not suppress it enough that I could actually get a good night's rest. Mm-hmm. It was one of the things that I really enjoyed after I got rid of the cough, was being able to get some sleep.
Absolutely. Now, if I recall correctly, when you went to a healthcare professional early March, they were unable to test because they simply didn't have test kits. Is that correct?
Yeah, they did not have them, and I'm not a high risk patient.
Yeah.
Didn't have any comorbidities or anything like that, and they, unfortunately, we can't test you because, and at that time we didn't have enough tests, and we didn't have enough, they couldn't do the quantities every day of testing that they wanted to do. Mm-hmm. And so it was unfortunate, but I have been, I'm on the NIH study for antibodies.
Oh, great. Good for you. Wow.
So, and they actually are interested in myself and my husband, because my husband, through the whole process, remained asymptomatic.
We're not talking about just a little bout of the flu, are we? Mm-mm. Mm-mm. We're talking about something that severely disabled you and you could not perform activities of daily living, even social activities. That is incredible. We know your story is a little different, and it involves both you and a family member. So tell me how that happened in your life.
Well, it started off, I was at work and taking care of a patient that we didn't have any suspicion of having COVID. Mm-hmm. And that was on the 6th of March. And then I got a phone call on the 8th saying that the patient had actually come back into our urgent care and tested positive, and that I was then on quarantine for 14 days as a precaution for that. So at that time, I felt okay. And then the next day, started to get a sore throat. And I thought, well, maybe I'm just being overly sensitive and psyching myself out. And then it progressed to a cough, and then just myalgia. I had really hard time, getting out of bed. I finally went into my urgent care that the hospital I work at, and was able to get tested. The one good thing I had going for me was I was able to get tested because I knew I was in contact with someone who was positive. Otherwise, they were really turning people away because of not having the supplies at the time. And it was a good month that I had just a terrible cough. I had a fever just really for one day, thankfully, but that cough, it's relentless, and just even taking a deep breath just sets off the cough. And it was cough suppressants I was on. I had an inhaler, and just nothing worked. It's miserable. And just to walk in my backyard, I maybe could do one lap, and then that was just as much as I could tolerate at 31 years old. Then it was on the 25th of March, my dad started to get, sorry, I'm still like emotional about it. So,
Yeah.
Look, I know
sorry.
how this must be. How old is your dad?
69. He turned 69 in the hospital. So, he started off with a cough that he just kept trying to brush off, thinking his cough was, just a cold or something that he had. And then it progressed, and he had chills and fevers, and was finally able to convince him to go into urgent care. And it's been 72 days today of him in the hospital. So
Now,
sorry.
One of our faculty shared with me, your dad did become actually severely ill. He could have lost his life, and he spent a long time in an ICU on a ventilator.
He went to the ICU pretty quickly once he got admitted. And he was intubated pretty quickly, was on the ventilator for about 60 days. The hard part with it is that you don't want to have that ET tube in for an extended period of time. But with COVID and with having so much unknown, they were having a really hard time placing a tracheostomy in him with the fear of exposing others to COVID. So that was a really hard battle to try and fight. He eventually, about 50 days in, got a tracheostomy. And stayed on the ventilator for about another week after that, and then has now, thank God, been able to get the tracheostomy out, and he's off oxygen, and it's now just caused severe myopathy. He can't walk. He stood for the first time today, so with the help of 3 people, but it's like a very long course for him that it's going to be of rehab. So, I mean, it just knocked him off his feet, literally. I was able to donate my plasma, and we did the transfusion for him. So we were able, he was the first one to receive that within my hospital. So it kind of set the pace for people after him. And since then, they've been able to do over 20 people of a plasma transfusion.
Hey, Scott, how are you?
My recovery has been agonizingly slow, unfortunately. Yeah.
But tell me about that. When did you first get sick?
So I noticed that there was something wrong on March 8th. It was a Sunday. And it felt like I had, there was an ache in my lungs when I inhaled. And I conveyed to my partner that it felt like I had smog in my lungs. And the only time I had ever experienced this before was when I was growing up in Los Angeles as a child. And as you know, they have high pollution levels quite often. And that's what it felt like. After that, it was 2 days later on March 10th, when I was at work at UCSD on the floor, and I felt just very fatigued. I took my temperature, low-grade fever was like 99.5. But at lunch, when I left for lunch, I started feeling like I had the flu. Took my temp again, it was 103. So immediately they sent me home. And then shortly thereafter, I developed a dry cough. The fevers never went down.
Oh my goodness.
And the fatigue continued. So that was Tuesday the 10th that I was relieved from duty from work. On Wednesday, I went to Kaiser, who's my primary care provider, and they didn't even want to see me at the office.
Wow.
Which I was so unfamiliar with, because this was all because they weren't at UCSD, they were not mandating masks, PPE with universally.
Right.
So this was all very new to me, going to Kaiser, and they were like, "Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead and go outside, and the doctor will phone you." The doctor phoned me and said, "We've arranged for you to go to the Zion emergency room." And so I went there. So that was at Vanderveer, the Vanderveer location. So I drove to Zion, and I had all of the COVID symptoms. I had fever, I had dry cough, I was short of breath. All those things were there, and I pleaded with the ER docs to please run a COVID test on me.
Yeah.
They did not. They said that they were running, the COVID testing kits were in very low supply, and they could not risk just doing one for me. They thought that I had the flu. So they ran a flu test, which came back negative right there and then, and they discharged me. So I went home and to try to recuperate myself, and the fevers just never let up.
Wow.
On Friday evening, I called Kaiser again and said, "I need to see someone, because this is not getting any better. I'm getting short of breath very easily upon exertion." And so they scheduled a phone appointment with me with a physician. I spoke to the doctor on Saturday morning, and he told me, "Get yourself immediately to the new Kaiser Hospital, where a team will examine you." So the one in Claremont.
Okay.
I drove myself there. My partner was actually in New York.
Oh.
And so drove myself there. I was miserable. It was something like out of a movie, Dean. These spacemen walked out of the ER and they examined me in my car. And they were like, "Okay, we've got a room for you. Go ahead and park your car, and we will text you when the room is ready for you." It was just so surreal. So I was immediately admitted. They brought me to the ICU, and from there, it was just the nightmare continued. It was so scary. Excuse me, I'm sorry.
Hey, it's okay. I'm just so sorry you went through
No,
this.
the
And
one that was, I'm sorry, go ahead.
As nurses, we know stuff that makes us scared. So tell me about the ICU experience.
What was so, it was so, the thing is that, so I was admitted on a Saturday.
Okay.
It was a Saturday afternoon, and it's so strange. I have absolutely no memory from Sunday evening until 2 weeks later. So they intubated me on, it was that Tuesday. I have no memory of that, and maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's my body trying to just cancel that out.
Oh gosh.
But I was intubated and on a ventilator for 2 weeks. The next thing I remember, I awoke and the entire world had changed. You know, this whole no visitor policy thing was now in effect. That was something I was not used to, because when I was working on that previous Tuesday, visitors were allowed in the hospital. There was no universal precautions taken. And now the world was completely different. And that was so scary. The thing I remember is I awoke with the intubation tube in, and there was a nurse dressed in a spacesuit, and he was, you know, trying to, you know, assess my cognition and, you know, whatnot. And I just remember that tube being in my throat. It was so scary because I had no idea what was going on. They tried conveying to me that, you know, Scott, you had the coronavirus, you were very ill. And I don't know why, but that just did not register with me. But so I was extubated on April 1st. And so I was there so I was awake and lucid with ICU delirium, unfortunately, because I was on such heavy sedation medications and whatnot. And it, you know, during my stay in the ICU, so I was there from April 1st when I was extubated, and I was discharged April 8th. So during that time, I could not see my family.
Oh.
You know, it's so strange, Dean. When I wake up in the morning, the first thing I remember, or when I wake up, is having that intubation tube in my throat. And I gotta tell you, it is so frightening to have that be your first memory. It's almost like I've got a little bit of PTSD.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So,
you've been through an experience that, you know, the definition of PTSD, not only is it very unusual for people in day-to-day lives, but it's profoundly emotionally traumatic. And to be put in that situation where everything you know about reality, about the way humans interact with humans, suddenly people are in spacesuits. There's no human connection. I mean, that must have been so hard.
And no visitors. I pleaded with the nurses and the doctors to please let my family come in and, you know, don the appropriate PPE just so that I could have some contact with some familiar, you know, faces. What was extremely difficult was, you know, several of the nurses had taken care of me while I was intubated. And they would come in, and there were 3 nurses in particular that came in, and they conveyed to me that, you know, my goodness, Scott, we were so happy to see you on our assignment roster, because quite honestly, we didn't think you were going to make it. You know, and I've got these battle scars, if you will, from the rotoprone bed. I've got scars on my chest, you know, that held me in. I've got this bump on my inner lip from the intubation tube where it was resting. So those are all reminders of things that, you know, that I had endured. But I'm so thankful for the team at Kaiser and what they did for me, and that I'm alive. I'm so lucky to be alive. But oh my goodness gracious, the recovery process has been very challenging. And what's really hard is that when I speak to my doctors and I ask certain questions such as, how long is this shortness of breath going to last? They have no idea. And their answer is always the same. It's always, well, Scott, you are the data. Because we quite honestly don't know if the shortness of breath will eventually resolve, or will it continue, and for how long. They have no idea. In several side effects that I've endured at home, I've had staph infections on my skin.
Oh,
I've had, and now the most recent is hair loss. And that is just, it's so strange. I'll run my fingers through my hair and my hand will be covered in my hair. And the doctors have no idea.
Yeah.
Is that a side effect of the remdesivir? They don't know.
Have you been weak? People talk about losing their muscle tone. Have you felt weakness?
Oh my goodness gracious.
Yeah.
So very much so.
Okay.
It was amazing how much muscle tone I lost. I drove myself to the hospital. I walked in on my own accord.
Yeah.
And I left needing a wheelchair, needing a walker. And that it really messes with your mind.
Yeah.
That so much changed in just the course of a month.
What's a normal day like for you now?
So a normal day for me is I usually wake up at around 5:30 in the morning, do my PT exercises,
Okay.
and then I go for a walk. And I'm not walking with my walker, I'm walking with my wheelchair in the event I need to sit.
Right. That's smart.